we've got a very special young man who has been out there actually putting his life on the line. I don't know how many of you, I don't know if I would do what he does. You know, when I first met Brandon Darby, it was in a program somewhere over in northeast Dallas or somewhere. Can't remember where. And when he started talking about he was this big lefty and he was working with those people that hate us, and they was talking about blowing buildings up and doing all kinds of stuff. And so, for some reason, and he can tell you about it, he had a change of heart and started working with the FBI and infiltrating those particular kinds of activities. Then he met a guy by the name of Andrew Breitbart, and I was fortunate enough to meet Andrew Breitbart, and Andrew Breitbart started stirring the tea. He really did. He started telling the message exactly like it really is, and there's a lot of people out there that doesn't like the truth, and that's what Breitbart Texas is all about, and Breitbart News is all about the truth. And so Brandon has been on the border. He's been down into Mexico. He's been from the tip of Texas all the way to California, working on these border issues as well as other things around the nation. Where the heat starts heating up, that's where Brandon goes. And we're really fortunate to have him come by here and share some of the stories and so forth that's going on, and actually in a lot of things that's actually going on the border today. So if you will, Brandon, if you'll come, appreciate you, young man.
Thank you. You know, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to say tonight. And a couple of positive updates is I fit back. Today is the first day that I put my 34-inch waist pants back on. I was wearing 36. No, I'm a single dad. I live in Lubbock now. I live in Lubbock, and I have full custody of a 7-year-old girl. And when I got full custody in October, you gain a little weight when all of a sudden you have a child full time instead of every other weekend. And then I saw a picture of myself in July, and I said, oh no. And I was thinking that, because I had gotten a new dryer, right? And I was like, and then I finally had to come to grips that it was time to buy a larger waist size. And I did it. And then I saw the picture, and of course the rest, you know what I mean. So anyways, that's a good positive story to start with. You know, I don't take it lightly that I'm in a church and I'm talking from, would this be a pulpit or is this a pew? No, this is a pulpit, yeah. And I don't take it lightly that I'm talking from someone's pulpit, and that a pastor has allowed this group to use their church and then to use their pulpit. I tell you, you know, some of my story tonight when I talk, it's inevitably going to I'm going to have to bring up God a couple of times. I just have to. And I know, but I always say, like, when I talk at churches, because I never want to be a hypocrite, because I find that so distasteful when people are hypocritical, you know, even though we all are on some things. But like the second that I leave here, I struggle with cigarettes really badly. And the second that I leave here, and I think that none of you can see me, I'm going to smoke, you know. And, yeah, so there's a few things I struggle with. But my story, you know, it's such a tricky thing. How many of you have ever heard anything about my story? Any of you? Okay, a lot of you have. How many of you haven't? Okay, so before I start talking, I guess I'm still going to be talking, but I'm going to give you a brief rundown of my story, okay? So I was born outside of Houston, Texas, in Pasadena. Remember Urban Cowboy? I know Pasadena? Okay. And long story short, when I was 13, I ran away from home. There were all kinds of reasons behind why a 13-year-old would run away from home, but I did. And just because I'm very hard-headed, I was able to stay gone about 2 years in Houston. And through a series of events, I ended up living with my grandparents. And you can imagine, though, that when went back into school after having not gone for 2 years, I felt like I didn't fit in with other kids very well because I had had all of these really insane life experiences, and none of the other kids that I was around had those experiences, you know. So I knew I was very different because I had seen a lot of things other people hadn't seen about life and the realities of the world. Not that the world's evil, but there's quite a bit of it in the world. We can agree on that. Like more than you would probably imagine, most of you, actually. So, long story short, I got caught up in a false narrative, like most people who are young and passionate, who want to change the world, who hate it when people abuse their power to hurt those who are weaker than they are. You know, I got very involved in activism. Naturally, I bought into the narrative that you guys were a bunch of racists and that the people on the left, that was the place for me, for people who are radical about helping others. And so for many years of my young life, I was, you know, a lot of the very prominent people, if we were to get into names, which I don't really feel like doing right now, but if we were to get into names, a lot of the very prominent far-left organizers you know of were people who were my mentors and took me in because I had a lot of passion. So long story short, you know, Katrina happens, the hurricane comes in, I go rescue some guy, all this crazy stuff happens. We end up accidentally starting this relief organization that became this really big deal on the left, right, on the grassroots left. And that kind of rocketed me to, as a community organizer, which you guys used to think was funny, right? Community organizer, haha, and you're like, oh, that's not so funny now, is it? You know, that community organizer knew what he was doing and changing this country, didn't he? Yeah, he wasn't so stupid after all. He might be bad, but he wasn't so stupid. And anyways, so that put me in this position of leadership on the far left, or on the left grassroots. And make a long story short, I got invited to Venezuela by Hugo Chavez. I went to Venezuela. I got to meet all of these crazy people from around the world who do NGOs or work with the UN or have nonprofits that help innocent people like the Palestinians. And to make a long story short, what happened was I began to become privy to a lot of information, and a lot of those people who help others, it turns out they're actually terrorists, they're revolutionaries who are willing to hurt people. So to make a long story short, this Palestinian guy who ran the largest Palestinian nonprofit in the U.S., he talked to me about some of his plans with money he had siphoned off out of the organization, several $100,000, up to $500,000 it turns out. And he was going to send that to suicide bombers, to fund suicide bombing. So naturally, like I actually, what I wanted to do was just get away from all these people at that point. And I still wasn't a racist right-winger, but I was not like the leftists I knew, right? And in hindsight, I'll get into that in a minute, but in hindsight, what happened was, when you look at the speeches and the stuff I said back then, I was always against federal aid. I felt like it really hurt people and perpetuated suffering and poverty. So I really had a lot of right-of-center arguments. It wasn't like I was a leftist and I just magically became a right-of-center guy. I was just this guy who had these views that didn't fit in with the rest of the left, but I was so radical about helping other people that it inspired them, and that's just where I fit in at the time. So in hindsight, that's another story, though, later. But so here's what happened. I was just going to get away from these people, and I continued to be privy to stuff. This Palestinian guy's name was Riyad Hamad. And Riyad Hamad, I figured when I told him no and got on to him for what he was talking about, I figured he would back away from it. But other people began to tell me that he had come to them and asked them to do the same thing he had asked me to do, that I refused to do. And then at that time, out of the blue, my mom's pastor sent me this link, and it was first responders from Israel going into facilities that have been bombed by suicide bombers. And there were like little kids' arms and blood and body parts, and I just remember thinking, like, I was like, okay, that's obviously God showing me something, right? And I was like, well, I got to do something about that. But you have to understand, when you're on the left, you do not talk to the FBI. Right? When you're a grassroots radical leftist, you don't talk, that community, they do not talk to the FBI. It's like, It would be like you going to eat dinner with Bill Ayers. That's how they look at it. Like, you wouldn't do that, right? Like, how many of you would do that? None of you would do that, right? I would probably do that, but just because, not for why you would think. But, well, Andrew actually had dinner. Andrew Breitbart had dinner with him. A long story. I'll get into that later, maybe. But here's I can get off on tangents, but here's what happened. So long story short, I went to law enforcement. I ended up talking to the FBI about what this guy was going to do. And then they were like, hey, this guy, we can't get this guy because he's really good at what he does. And he trusts you. You need to help us. And I was like, oh, no. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, I should do that. I should help him. And at that point, I had begun to realize that so many of, imagine that you're young, right? Imagine that you're a young person, a young, teenager, person in your late teens, early 20s. You're really radical about something. You believe in a cause, and there's a couple of people you really look up to, and because you think they're righteous, everything they say is gold, right? So most of your views on the country and on the founding fathers and on everything about our system it's kind of formed by those people because they're the people you look up to. But then imagine one day you become one of those people that people look up to, and then whenever you go to an event, you're with those people you look up to, right? And y'all break bread together, and if you stay when you go and travel to another town, y'all stay in the same house as someone's house, or you access the halls of your hero, right? And then you find out they're just full of it, And then you start to think, well, wait a minute, man, like everything I think about this or that is based upon how they described it. And now I'm watching them describe this way. Maybe I need to revisit some things I thought, So at that point in my life, I basically, I started to really feel like a fool, and I started to question. And I never felt bad about all the people I helped in New Orleans, our shelters that we started, all the good things we did. And I didn't even feel bad about how radical I was about doing it, meaning so in your face to get a shelter started when it needed to be started, even though it was illegal to start it because we didn't have the permits. We did it anyways, and then we got the permits, right? That kind of stuff. I didn't feel bad about that, but I felt bad about some of the things I'd said about my country, the way I'd looked at my country, right? I started to feel bad about a lot of that. So I felt like I owed it. So I decided I would help the FBI, and I did, and then I did really well at it. So they were like, hey, why don't you help us in this other situation too? And I was like, oh, all right. And well, next thing you know, for 2 years, I just worked undercover all the time and with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And Riyadh got busted finally. And when he got busted, it was really scary. He went missing for a few days, right, after the FBI raided his house and his facilities. And then he was found wrapped in duct tape in the middle of Lady Bird Lake in the center of Austin. But okay, so it sounds like the FBI got him, right, or something? He didn't realize there was a traffic camera that caught the whole deal. So he wrapped himself up as like a final middle finger to the U.S. to, cause controversy. And then he jumps in the lake to kill himself because he knows he's going to go to prison for what he did, right, for what he was doing. So I was not happy about that, obviously. If any of you are in law enforcement and have ever been involved with someone who died, whether you shot him or somehow you played a role in that, even if I didn't do anything wrong, but there's still someone that I knew who I helped bust who was dead now, and that messes with you. It takes you a little while to get normal again, right? It bothers you a little bit. So, long story short, there was a bunch of those cases like that. One of the cases I worked on was I worked at the 2008 RNC, and there was a group of people, a very large group of people, who were intent on making sure Republicans did not meet at that RNC. And they were going to shut it down by any means necessary. They made bombs. They made all numbers of plans to interfere with Republicans' rights to assemble. And I was part of the effort with the FBI to infiltrate them and make sure they didn't get to do that. So long story short, some of them made bombs. We busted them. And my name came out in discovery in a trial. And when my name came out, The New York Times, all the way down, began to attack me ruthlessly, ruthlessly shred my character. Ultimately, one of them pled guilty, another guy fought it, we went to trial, he had a hung jury because it was, the FBI set him up and blah, all this stuff. But long story short, by the time it was all said and done, they all went to prison, they all admitted they were lying. But the left media didn't stop. They kept going on it and kept going. They made a movie, PBS made a movie with HBO and some funding from Soros's Sundance Foundation. And they made a movie that did really well called Better This World that just absolutely lied and attacked me and the FBI. And basically, it was the story of two childhood friends who set out to better this world and protest the policies of George W. Bush until they met the FBI's Brandon Darby. And they did that. And so it went on and on and on. I was getting attacked. Andrew Breitbart, how many of you know about Andrew? How many of you don't know about Andrew? Oh, man, I need like 10 hours here, but I'm not going to do it to you. Anyways, this amazing man who ran a media empire heard me getting attacked on NPR, National Public Radio, and he got a hold of me. And that was another God thing. I could tell you the whole story. It's really a neat story, but I'm not going to do that to you. So he got a hold of me and said, why don't you fight back? I said, I do fight back. They don't print what I say. They misquote me. They lie. And he said, well, I'm starting this website called Big Government, and you're welcome to fight back on my website when I start it. And I was like, well, thank you, sir. And so I did begin to fight back. Well, long story short, Andrew and I got very close. He later passed away. And I later started Breitbart Texas, right under the company's wing as an affiliate of the company. And so now I manage Breitbart Texas, and I think we do a very good job. Our writers do a great job. So I'm getting kind of warm. Can y'all excuse my tattoos, please? I do have some. Nothing lewd or anything, or no dancing devils or something like that. Just a couple of tattoos. But here's the thing. So what I do now is I find issues where there are people being done wrong, people are lying, and I find people in law enforcement or otherwise, just like Andrew fought for the Tea Party, that's what we do. We find people who are being demonized by left media, by the entire cultural establishment and the media establishment, and we find ways to defend you. That's why the Tea Party groups loved Andrew so much, is because that's what he did, is he defended the Tea Party ruthlessly. Because it was just a bunch of average people, working people, normal people, who were doing the right thing, getting involved politically, and you got attacked, you got demonized. Well, one of the things that I found was I started to realize, okay, so here's what happened. It's a boring story. But, so after my name came out, the FBI had to stop using me, right, as an undercover. But they decided that they wanted to open me up in another division in violent crimes, so I did that for a while. Not violent crimes, I busted violent criminals. Well, so then, the headquarters found out they were doing that. It was real controversial because I was so public, but they figured nobody in that world would know me, right? And that I could pull it off. So they shut that down. Well, then I later was opened up again by the FBI, and I worked in counter human trafficking, which was an amazing thing to do. But one of the things I began to realize was that almost everyone who I helped wouldn't have been a victim had it not been for Mexican transnational criminal organizations we call cartels and criminal organizations in the U.S. If it weren't for that open border, they wouldn't be victims, right? So I started looking around and I started noticing all these conservatives were like, shut the border, they're doing this. And so I was looking at it and I was like, man, I look at it like, of course there's criminals. I write about and expose criminals who come across that border more than any other journalist in this country. I honestly do. I really do. And some of you who read Breitbart Texas can attest to that. But I look at the border and I started to see it as this thing where it's like it increased human suffering, right? Like I started to not only think about the victims, the families here who had relatives who were victims of people who came illegally into this country, but I started to have a real heart for the women who came illegally, who were sex trafficked. who were exploited, the children, the little girls. And I started to realize it's liberals saying that the loving thing to do is to let people come here in this current system. That's not loving at all. If you knew what I knew, you would agree with me. How many of you agree with me? Any of you? Okay. How many of you don't? Okay. So, long story short, that turned into me wanting to cover the border. I started looking at the border, and then I started to see these Border Patrol agents, and they were demonized in the media just like the Tea Party groups were. And they were demonized without a voice just like I had been. So we began to fight for them. And that, of course, led to us having very close relationships with Border Patrol agents, which, of course, led to all of you knowing about the minor crisis, which really wasn't a minor crisis. But the crisis that happened last summer is when it culminated. That was us who broke that. And we broke that because several people in the Border Patrol risked losing their pensions and their jobs to leak those photos to us. And we were able to present that, and that really changed the dynamic about border issues in the country. Not that we played a role in it, but it was primarily just because there were some courageous agents who wanted people to know what was going on in the country. And we didn't take a risk to do that part. They took the risk. They risked their careers and their families' well-being to do it. So that's how that all came about with Borders, and that's a little bit about who I am and what I do. Some of the things, how many of you feel kind of negative lately about and not as hopeful about politics as you once might have? Yeah. Man, I feel the same way sometimes. I don't like to be ugly to people, right? How many of you get on Twitter? Any of you? Okay, you got to fix that. Y'all got to fix that. Somebody needs to have a class about how to do Twitter. Seriously. You got to engage in the culture, to challenge in the culture war, because that's what we're having. Facebook, that'll work too. But here's the thing. How many of you notice there's a lot of people, okay, listen to this now. Listen to me. Let me finish before you boo me. There's a lot of people who don't like Trump who are attacking anyone who does, and there's a lot of people who do like Trump who are attacking anyone who doesn't. And there's a lot of people who like Rick Perry who are attacking anyone who doesn't. And then there's a lot of people who don't like Rick Perry who are attacking anyone who does. And it's getting real ugly. It's uglier than it was last time around. And it's real easy to feel disjointed. It's real easy to feel separated. And it's really easy to get hateful back, when someone's ugly to you. And if you guys are wondering, I'm kind of with you on the cruise thing, So, actually more than kind of. I really think highly of Ted Cruz. I think Trump's interesting to watch. He makes me laugh, and I appreciate that somebody talks back, and I appreciate all that. Policy-wise, I don't know. People are like, which policy of his do you like? I'm like, he talks back, So I don't know, but I do like me some Ted Cruz. But here's the thing about getting discouraged. I was asked to speak at this church in Lubbock, right? And this pastor contacted me and said, hey, would you come and tell your story to this group of pastors in Lubbock? And I said, well, you mean like a Tea Party group or something? And he was like, no, like at a seminar thing. And I said, well, I don't really live my life in a way where it's appropriate that I go in a church and preach or something, right? I just don't live my life like that. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell you everything I told him, because that would be scandalous. But I just told him the truth. I said I smoke. It's like a really bad witness. I sometimes cuss. I have a daughter who's a love child. Like, I've never been married, And her mother is married. She was not married when we had a child. That was later. Just clarifying. No Ashley Madison accounts. Nothing like that. Nothing that bad. But it's still, I don't live my life right? I don't live my life in a way that if people were watching me as a public person, I would want, I don't live my life in a way where I would want them, I would feel like I would disgrace the kingdom of God sometimes with how I act, How many of you ever feel that way? Any of you? A couple. I don't think so. maybe in my 60s, and I'm 38 right now, so not right now. But here's the deal, and this guy told me, he said, well, so is that just your excuse? Like, and I'm like, excuse me? And he's like, is that your excuse? Like, so, you know, you have this story, God brought you to these places and through this stuff, and you're not going to tell that story to other people or have any responsibility to share Christ or share about hope until you're perfect or you live right? Is that how this works? And I was like, I don't think of it like that, you know? And so I was like, okay, you're right. I'll go tell my story, but I'm going to tell people what's wrong with me up front. And he was like, well, they'll probably appreciate that, because most people don't do that. And I said, okay. So anyways, that's how that came about. But here's what I noticed, right? I noticed that there's a lot of people in the conservative world, and in the Tea Party movement especially, even though not everyone identifies as Tea Party anymore, because some people in the Tea Party movement have found a way to make bunches of money off of you people. I mean, they make a bunch, you know that, right? They make a lot of money off the Tea Party movement, like tons of money. And then all their relatives make tons of money. And it's unbelievable to me. So a lot of people have distanced themselves from the Tea Party movement. A lot of people haven't, but a lot of people have. But here's what the thing is about the conservative movement, is that there's so many people who are really, at this point, they feel discouraged, and they're afraid to really engage or have any rigor. They really thought after, 2008, 2009, they really thought, they were like, you know what? We're going to change this country. And then Romney didn't get elected, which I don't know that would have changed things much anyways. Sorry. I'm not calling him a rhino. I do not call names. But I think it sometimes. But here's the thing, is everyone got really discouraged because we didn't win, right? We didn't win that time. Like, people voted in a man who was like, who doesn't like us. I'm pretty sure he doesn't like us at this point. In fact, I think the other day he called us crazies. You know, well, I think he's pretty crazy, personally. But here's the thing, everyone's very discouraged, you know, and they feel like they can't do anything. They feel like they can't get involved. And they're not, no one's really, I mean, some people are, don't get me wrong, if you're doing it, don't yell at me afterwards. But a lot of people, right? There's a lack of energy, you know. Everyone's discouraged. They saw people, you know, everybody wanted Strauss out, and they saw people turn on them for that. And then half of the Tea Party's mad because they think that was a stupid effort, that we were going to fail, and then the other half is like mad because other people didn't support it. And I mean, everybody's tearing each other's guts out and feeling discouraged, and no one's really maybe you are, as individuals or as a group, but most people in this movement around the country, they're just not putting the energy or the soul into it, you know? They've had too many experiences where they've gotten involved in stuff and they didn't have all the answers, or they feel like they were made to look like a fool. How many of you ever felt that way, debating a liberal? Have you ever felt like you didn't? Remember when we all got upset about the Marine holding the holding the umbrella? And then everybody got mad, and then all of a sudden all the liberals started tweeting out pictures of Reagan doing it, Bush doing it, Bush doing it. You know what I mean? That kind of deal. And then you feel like, okay, maybe I feel stupid because I didn't know that happened or whatever. But everyone's very, very discouraged. But here's what I see, you know. And much kind of like my situation. I mean, I don't agree with the Tea Party movements on everything. The Strauss thing, don't get mad at me, but I don't like him. I think he's a liberal. I think I really do. But I don't know that was the best thing we could have done. You know, I didn't critique the movement for it. But that's my personal thoughts, you know. I do agree with the movement on abortion issues. I'm very strongly pro-life. I do agree with the movement on a number of issues, but not on all issues, you know. I agree with the movement generally where most people in the Tea Party are on immigration and illegal immigration. But I also keep in mind that my Bible, and it's just how I interpret it, but it says, like, do not despise a man who steals to satisfy his hunger, you know? So, like, I want to kick someone out, and I want to follow the law because I know we're a nation of laws, but I also want to have a loving attitude towards the person while I do it, you know? But I'm someone who feels sympathy for people on death row, too, and most people I know don't. They think that's evil of me. You know, like, well, if that was your daughter they killed. And I'm like, well, it wasn't my daughter they killed, you know? And it's horrible, and they're suffering, they're human consequence, but I have a place in my heart for those people Just like I have a place in my heart for people who come here illegally. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I understand. I wouldn't stay there either. But that doesn't mean that my country can be eroded and destroyed either, you know? We still are a nation of laws, and we have to honor that, or else we become like them, because that's what's different between us and them, right? So I don't agree with everyone on everything at all. But I get to travel so much, and and the putting myself in danger all the time, that's because in my company there are two of us. Insurance, how much money do you think it costs for a news company to send a journalist into Mexico to find people to attack the cartels and write about the cartels? How much do you think that insurance costs in case something happens to me? Right. So there are two of us who have that insurance that the company pays for. So consequently, when something crazy goes on in the world, they're like, hey, there's Ebola outbreaking in Liberia. And it's like, nice, you know? Or, hey, there's riots in Baltimore. It's like, nice. You know? And then I came to that dang thing in Garland. You know what happened to me? I go to Baltimore to cover the riots, and then all these liberals found out I was there, and they started, how many of you heard about this? They started tweeting each other, or tweeting each other, like to find me and hit me in the head with a brick. And then these were groups of people. There were like thousands of them, and they were carrying like trash pails, like one on each side, you know, kind of carrying them, full of bricks to throw. I mean, that's how crazy things got. What did I tweet out? I don't remember what I tweeted out. Oh, I remember something. I talk back to people sometimes. Oh, yeah, silly anarchists. I've been here for days. Your intel is slow. And so, yeah, they were pretty mad. So I left that situation, really glad that nobody hit me with a brick in the head. And I was like, I'm just going to cover this, like, draw the prophet thing in Garland. And I'm there, and it's like, brah, brah. It's like, okay. And then I got dispatched to go film a Zetas cartel drug shipment in Laredo. So I'm like in the brush and the woods and the trees and you know. And man, I had always been kind of resentful that I lived in Lubbock because, see, you have to understand, I'm not from Lubbock, okay? I'm from Pasadena. I've lived in Austin a long time, in New Orleans, spent some time in other big cities, right? And I found out I was having a child. I was not living my life appropriately. And I found out I was having a child with someone whose family lived in Lubbock. So we decided that we were not very close as a couple, so she would live with her family in Lubbock and not with me. And I then would go every other weekend, which I'm very proud that I handled it that way. But I went every other weekend to Lubbock to see my daughter for over 5 years, you know. And long story short, some things went on in the personal family stuff, and the mother's a great person, but some issues came up, and it became apparent that I needed to take my daughter full time. So I didn't want to pull my daughter out of everything else she knew when her mother was going to be away, you know. I didn't want to pull her away from the grandparents she was close to, or her school, or her little life, right? So I decided to move to Lubbock in October. But that does not mean I was happy about being in Lubbock, you know. I was not happy as I picked dirt out of my teeth and the fly swarm season, and I was like, man, this is messed up. But I tell you, when I did that trip where I went to Baltimore, to Garland, to the terrorist event, to the workplace violence in Garland, and then the Zetas drug shipment in Laredo, and I remember flying back into Lubbock, and I was like, man, I'm so happy I live here. You know? I'm so very happy I live here. So anyways, I'm happy I live in Lubbock now, away from the crazy stuff. But that's not the point. The point is everyone, I got off on a tangent, but everyone's very discouraged, you know, and everyone feels, not everyone, please don't be like, oh, I don't feel discouraged. Okay, I got it. Some people yell at me sometimes, especially when I say nice things about, like, having a heart for people we need to deport, you know. And that doesn't mean don't deport them. It means like you don't have to be a mean jerk in the process of it. And remembering that Jesus loves that person as much as he loves you or me. And I think we forget that, right? Most of us do. I don't mean that rudely, but in the Tea Party movement where everybody's angry, I get it. Everyone's angry, their rights are being trampled on, their country's being torn apart. And you know darn good and well that Democrats, the only reason they want that to happen is because they want those people to vote for them, and we know that. They want to turn our states blue and turn us into some socialist hellhole, and we know that. But that doesn't mean we have to be ugly, but it's understandable that we're angry, right? But here's the thing, is everyone's so discouraged. And what I kind of come to the grips with is that I can't control you. I can't control Eric Erickson or my boss or any of the other, Glenn Beck or any of the other media heads. I can't control anyone else but me and my little girl. Right now I can't because she's 7. She's like, well, Daddy, I'm like, I told you. She's like, yes, sir. I'm like, thank you. But other than my little girl, I really can't control anyone else, right? So all I can do is take care of my end of the street. And that matters in this movement. I'm going to tell you why it matters. When everyone around you is bickering about a candidate, how many of you have had this happen yet? Any of you? Any of you gotten hurt about a candidate, felt betrayed, and had friends attacking you? Any of you watch the people online who you read, the bloggers in the state, how every primary season, it's okay, they start attacking each other's character, and they're all mad at each other? And how half of the Tea Party leaders in the state, and I'm not trying to be ugly, but when I want to go to the border and I'm like, hey, I want to get everyone, they're like, I ain't going if she's going. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. I'm like, don't do that. I'm like, well, she needs to apologize. Let me call her. I'm like, hey, I ain't going if she's going. And I'm like, oh, man. So then you make peace, and they're like, well, the problem is both of us aren't going to go if he's going. And it's like, oh, man, y'all are making it hard on me. Being a peacemaker in the movement's really difficult to do. Because there are some angry people at each other, hurt people. People got hurt. But here's the thing is you can only control your side of the street. You know, so even if the whole movement's falling apart, which it isn't at all, but even if it were true, all you're responsible for is you and what you do. How many of you, like the men in here, if you walked by, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, but let me do it. If you were walking down the street in downtown Dallas, right, in the middle of the night, which probably most of you shouldn't be doing, but just imagine you were. Imagine you went to somebody wanted you from work, wanted you to go have a drink with them downtown, right? So you went and talked to him. You're walking home and you saw a guy trying to sexually assault a woman. You would intervene. How many of you would not intervene? Would any of you not intervene in that? How many of you would intervene? Okay. And what if it were 5 guys doing it? You'd still intervene, wouldn't you? Right, but my point is this. What if it were 50 people? What if it were 50 people? Now listen to me. What if it were 50 people doing it? You know what I would do? And I can tell you that I would do this because I've been in enough, I can actually say that because I've been in some crazy experiences between the leftist, Venezuela, FBI, everything thing. I've been in some awkward spots where I did not necessarily know that I was going to come out the other side okay, you know? I did, thankfully, but I didn't know that I was. Most of you who are veterans have been in that spot, or former law enforcement, you've been in that spot too. You know what the feeling I'm talking about that you have to walk through. You're just as afraid as everyone else would be, but you do it anyways because it's the right thing to do. And so I ask you that because this is, if I'm walking down the street and there's somebody doing that, I'm going to stop that dude. But if there's 50 people doing it, I think I would rather die trying to stop it than live the rest of my life knowing I didn't help her. You know? So even if it's not popular, even if it doesn't feel like it's going to make a bit of change or do any good, there's a right thing to do and there's a wrong thing to do. And sometimes it's a little gray, but not all the time. There's a lot of times there's a right thing and there's a wrong thing to do. And we got to keep choosing to do the right thing, regardless of what other people do or what other they think about it. You know, when I started working with the FBI, man, my whole social world of people who knew me, right, would not have approved. And when my name came out, it didn't have to come out. The FBI actually wanted me to keep working undercover, but the U.S. Attorney's Office was like, here's the deal. If you don't testify, this guy's going to walk. You know? If you do testify, you can't work undercover anymore, and everyone's going to know your name and know you did it. And I ultimately decided I didn't want him to walk, so I decided I would testify. My name came out. But I tell you what, how many of you can imagine having everyone from the New York Times to all the local Austin papers to the Austin Chronicle to everyone in the world attacking you, attacking your character, sharing every bad story anyone will say about you, even though 90% of it is untrue, but you can't talk back because you're going to testify in 60 days. So you're just sitting there watching this unfold. Your mom's hurt. All your friends are attacking you. Everyone that you depended on and worked with for years is attacking you. You know? But I still did the right thing. And in the end, God blessed that I did the right thing. I don't have a lot of money. I have a nice salary now, but I didn't for many years. It's not about that kind of blessing. But if it hadn't have been for what I went through from doing the right thing, I wouldn't have the ability to help people I help now. And I wouldn't have the career I have now and the activism I have now and the support of the Tea Party I have now. And I wouldn't have met Andrew, and I wouldn't have all these wonderful things and things I've been able to experience I wouldn't have now. But at the time that I was going through it, there were times I wanted to die, literally. If I hadn't had a daughter, I probably would have, because it was so sad to watch just be destroyed like that. Just so hurtful. But my point is that I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing. I knew I was doing the right thing. And I came out the other end better for having done it. And I think the situation we're in right now in our movement and in our country is that it's real easy to get caught up in all these wrong things and all these fightings and all this, like calling everybody, like I said, you can call everybody who supports Trump a low information voter, or you can call everybody who doesn't, what do they call, you know the names I'm talking about. People are so ugly right now. But you don't have to engage. You can just keep doing the right thing, and I promise you, in the end, it gets blessed. And I don't know that it gets blessed in this world. Like, I'm not a theologian. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is somehow or another, even if you're the only human being having this movement the way that you think it ought to be done, and everyone else in the movement disagrees with you, as long as you're doing it that way, then that's still part of our movement, Just got to keep trucking on the right things. I know it's depressing right now. It's depressing for me in media because before Andrew died, Andrew Breitbart, of course, who some of you didn't know, which is a real problem. We've got to fix that. But before Andrew died, everybody was kind of cohesive in right media. We all worked on things together. And when Andrew died, it wasn't because Andrew died, but I think it had a little to do with that. It also had to do with funding and finances and how that all worked out in the media world. But everybody began to attack each other and destroy each other. And you guys might not pay attention to it, but like Breitbart attacks this guy, and then that guy's website attacks this guy, and everybody's just like attacking each other all the time, discrediting each other, And then here I am going, I ain't going to live that way, I know what you said about me, but I ain't going to attack you back. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be that way. And then everyone says, well, your movement is so uncaring towards immigrants, which really they mean illegal aliens. But they're like, your movement is so uncaring, or your movement is so caught up in turmoil. And I'm like, not me. And they're like, yeah, but your movement. I'm like, well, I'm part of the movement too. So as long as I'm doing it this way, you can't say the movement's that way. You can say most people in the movement are that way. But you can't say I am or the movement is, because I'm part of it too, And I'm doing the right thing. So that's what I got to share with you. Hopefully, a little bit of my life experience, I hope some of you found it not to be the day in and day out life experiences of all those around you. And I hope that most of you gained something from coming to hear me tonight. One thing I'm going to do for a little bit, I have a little bit of time, is I want to talk with you all. And I want to know, what things do you want to hear about, or what questions do you want to ask? Yes, sir. In the red shirt, the handsome man in the red shirt. I do. I'll tell you a little story, just to show you the closeness to the situation that I had. He and I were on the phone, and we were dealing with some things. And at the time, I was dating a wonderful woman named Katie Pavlich, who was on Fox all the time. And she's still a very good friend, but we're no longer dating. I got off the phone with him to talk with her because she was prettier than he was, and like a lot prettier actually. Anyway, sorry. Memory lane. So, anyways, when I called him back, a little while later after talking to her, I called and a woman answered the phone, and it was a Los Angeles police officer. It was a police officer. And I said, well, who's this? And she said, who are you calling for? And I said, I'm calling for Andrew Breitbart. Who is this? Where is my friend? And she said, well, and she identified herself as a law enforcement officer. But she wouldn't tell me any other information. And she started asking me questions. And I said, uh-oh, And then I thought, well, you know what? Maybe he was drinking, and he likes wine sometimes. Maybe he crashed his bike or something, or bicycle or something, or he had a little scooter at the time. And then I heard paramedics arrive, and I heard him say he has a ring on his finger in the background, and I knew something was wrong. So I gave her the contact information she needed, and his name and his family's name. And then I called his business partner, Larry, who's now one of my bosses, and I told him what was going on. And it was a really horrible night. So we were all, pretty directly involved in the situation. Very close to his wife and his sister and his best friend, Larry, who's now one of the owners of Breitbart, or always was, but now he runs it without Andrew. Very close to it. So initially when he passed away, I had a lot of questions, you can imagine. But I am satisfied that he had a heart defect and his heart gave out on him. 100% satisfied at this point. But for many months I was not. And it didn't help that Jerome Corsi and WorldNet Daily and all those people profited and made clickbait off of accusations that Andrew was dead. One day I was watching that, and they had put up a video, and it was some guy describing Andrew dying. He saw him. And it really hurt me, that someone would even do that. Not to knock on Jerome Corsi, but that's what they did, and it was uncool. But I guess if you didn't know Andrew, then he's just some star you're writing about. I guess we tend to dehumanize people and not think of that. Like we might say something about Joel Osteen, or we might say something about Britney Spears that we probably wouldn't say if that were one of our daughter's friends or something, because we think they're not human beings, but they are, And so I'm convinced that he died of natural causes. I know a lot about what was going on in his health at the time. But it's a good question, and it's asked everywhere I go, so I'm glad that it's okay that you asked it, It's a good question. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
What's going on on the border now? What's going on down there?
You poor people. Y'all came down here to hear me talk about the border. And I got off on a tangent and told you about my life instead. The border, what's going on the border? Well, I know you know, but as most of you know, there are 9 sectors on the southwest border. Contrary to popular belief, Rick Perry did not secure all 5 sectors of the Texas border with Mexico. He did do a pretty good job on one in his last few months of office. After 12 years, or what? I'm sorry, I do that. I'm very critical of politicians. I'm sorry, I'm critical of everyone, except for really Ted Cruz, because he doesn't do anything that I need to be critical of. Except that trade thing. That trade thing got me. The H-1B visas I have some questions about. I'm confused on that issue. I don't claim to know all the answers, but that's not the point. The point is that each sector has different stuff going on. There's still a higher degree of law enforcement presence in the Rio Grande Valley sector. The next sector over is the Laredo sector. Under Abbott, the DPS has begun to do operations they probably began about 6 or 7 months ago that I started getting wind of. Doing operations before it was announced, but they've begun to do operations in the Laredo sector. After Laredo sector, you have the Del Rio sector. After Del Rio sector, you have the Big Bend sector. After Big Bend, you have the El Paso sector, which carries you all the way to the Arizona border with New Mexico. And then you have Tucson, then you have Yuma, then you have El Centro, then you have San Diego. But the problems that we face is that the agents everywhere from the Rio Grande Valley sector over, they don't feel like they're getting enough attention or help. And if we can't get enough attention to something, something's wrong, you know what I mean? But the truth is most people just don't care about it right now. They want to talk about Trump, or they want to talk about Hillary's emails, and they don't want to talk about what's going on the border. And the truth is, in the Rio Grande Valley sector, which is the second most secured sector in the U.S. right now, next to Yuma. And the reason Yuma is secure is because they actually have a wall. They actually have the complete rundown of what the U.S. can do on the border in Yuma, and it works very well. Doesn't work on every case, but it works on 90-something% of them, which is pretty good. I will get to tunnels. The Rio Grande Valley sector, here's the problem. How many of you know about the November 20th Jay Johnson memo? Remember that? They dumped it right before Thanksgiving when all the reporters were on vacation. And so no one reported on it. We did. But I actually didn't know about it until after Thanksgiving, so then you couldn't report on it because you look like a moron because you're reporting on something that happened a week ago, right? So I found a way to report on it again, make it fresh. But basically in that memo, it details it's Obama's executive orders. It's saying like, hey, from now on, you're going to classify aliens in 1, 2, or 3 categories, illegal aliens. And 1 and 2 categories, you know, 2 of the categories, you're just going to basically not even arrest or detain because we're not going to deport them. We're just going to let them go. So regardless of what you do to secure the border, it doesn't really matter that much right now because everyone who comes gets to stay. In fact, there's I think it's a 98.9% successful, it's called a successful migration rate, meaning that 98.9% of people who we know who come here illegally end up staying in the United States. That's the fact. That's what we released leaked documents from 2014 that showed that to be the case. From 2013 and half of 2014. So we're in a bit of a pickle when it comes to our border stuff. One of the other problems, though, is we have a lot of people demagoguing and advocating for things they don't know what they're talking about. How many of you, and don't get mad at me, I know I'm being a little critical, how many of you think a wall, we need a wall across the whole border? Any of you think that? Okay, I would say it would help in most areas. Most areas, not all areas. There's a lot of things that we need, but we need a leader who, A, will build a wall and increase security on the border, but also we need to do something about the fact that our country, it's called how many of you know about push factors and pull factors in immigration, right? So a war breaks out in Central America, that's a push factor. People want to get away. And then we're over here going, hey, if you come here, you get to stay. And you get all of the entitlements of being a U.S. citizen. You get free health care, you get everything you want. All of our people, we're going to tax them more to pay for it. That's called a pull factor. So it pulls people away, pulls people here. And until we get rid of the pull factors, we're in trouble, man. Because there's not, I mean, even North Korea's walls, right? People get in and out of those things. You know, not a lot of people, but enough people do, some people. So we have a real problem. We have a complex issue that isn't solved with a wall. It isn't solved with comprehensive immigration reform. Bull. It isn't solved with, we have a massive problem. We need what's called comprehensive border security reform. Nobody's saying that. People are like, I'm going to build a wall. Deport them, build a wall. That doesn't cut it. There's a little more involved. Yes, sir. Handsome gentleman. And what is that shirt? What pattern is that? The handsome gentleman with the matching blouse next door. What's going on? That's probably talking about in the Tucson sector, and it's probably talking about actually the area where Brian Terry was killed. It's talking about outside of, just west of Rio Rico, Arizona. Now, here's the deal with that. That is not entirely true. But what is true is this, is that, okay, I know I'm getting off. You got to bear with me, okay? You have to bear with me. Don't run out the door. I got about 15 more minutes, I think, and then I'll go. So here, bear with me. Here's what you have to understand, okay? You have to understand that, first off, that U.S. counterterrorism policy on the southern border is based on the notion, it's based on the presumption that the Mexican cartels would not do something that would hurt their ability to make money in the future. So they would not cross a terrorist, for instance, because they're like, well, why would we do that and not, that's what the U.S. thinks. But that is not the case any longer. It used to be that there was one big cartel, right, and a couple criminal organizations, and then there became many cartels. We could get into that. We don't need to for this conversation. And they all had older, mature, business-oriented people who were like, hey, if you commit a bunch of crimes against tourists, they're not going to come back, and it's going to hurt us. Hey, if you kill people in the streets and kill civilians who are not involved in our crimes, it's going to cause us problems and hurt our bottom line. And so they used to be akin to the Mexican mafia, or not to the Italian mafia, okay? Imagine that, You have some wealthy guy sitting there thinking strategically. Now, for a lot of reasons, that is not the case any longer on part of our border. That's why Texas is in so much trouble, and that's why if a terrorist were to cross the border, it's going to happen in South Texas. I'll tell you why. The area from the Gulf of Mexico to Zapata, Texas is controlled by the Gulf cartel, okay? The area from Zapata through Laredo, somewhere close to part of the Big Bend, is controlled by the Zetas cartel, okay? And then after that, it's pretty much the Sinaloa Federation, the Sinaloa cartel, but it's really just a series of groups, So there's a Tijuana cartel, but it's allied. There's a Juarez cartel, but it's allied. It's like, it doesn't matter. So the Sinaloa Federation is still controlled by those old men using their brains, right? They're professionals, okay? So they don't want to do things that's going to hurt their long-term profit sustainability, right? Profit making. But when you get to the Zetas and the Gulf cartel, who are, from somewhere by the Big Bend sector and Del Rio sector all the way to the Gulf, right, of Mexico, there are no more big older guys who think ahead. They're a bunch of 22-year-old gangbangers with millions of dollars and a lot of weaponry and armored vehicles. That's what they are. They act like gangs. They're infighting each other for power. They act like criminal street gangs. So you have a difference there. So when you look at the minor crisis of 2014, which really had happened for 2 years before we knew about it, right? Because the government hid it from us. But when you look at that crisis, what was that? Well, in 2012, the United Nations said, in a report called, I hate to try to sound so like academic to you people. I'm sorry, I have to do it though. But in a report from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime for Central America and the Caribbean, they said that certain cartels basically were suffering because of a loss in marijuana profits and a loss in cocaine profits, and that they were starting to see a trend where they were turning to human trafficking and sex trafficking and human smuggling in order to replace their profits. That was in 2012. Well, so what happened was the Gulf cartel. You notice none of those people were coming through California, right? Or Arizona, really, or even most of Texas. They were coming through the one area controlled by the Gulf cartel. And the Gulf cartel made over $300 million off of it, off of that thing. So what does that tell us, though? It scares us, and it goes back to U.S. policy and U.S. thoughts on border security and of terrorism, because it shows that the Gulf cartel knew They're like, hey, if we start dumping off, 1,000 little kids and women a day on the border, Americans are going to get mad about it, and it's going to get in the news, and then there's going to be a lot of border security. And then tomorrow, we're not going to be able to get our cocaine through, right? They knew that, but they didn't care. See the difference? You see the problem? They didn't care anymore, you know? That is the dynamic of what's going on. So, that said, in the Tucson sector of Arizona, remember the professional cartel I told you about? Remember the Sinaloa? That's who controls that. This is what people don't know, is when you're on the border in Laredo, Texas, yeah, they have radios. The scouts have radios, but they're like gangbangers. You know, think about gangbangers you see if you drive to, what's a gangbanger area around here? Does Mesquite have a lot of gangbangers? Mesquite? What area? What town here? Okay, it's like that, you know? But just ruthless, knowing they're not going to get caught, so they kill you. That's what they're like. When you go to Arizona and you're dealing with the Sinaloa Federation, the professionals, which is what we're talking about, they, Peck Canyon Corridor is what you're talking about. Sorry, I guess remembered, outside of Rio Rico. They're not like these little gangbangers here. They're just as evil, but they're different. They have all of the most advanced communications that our Navy SEALs have, that our Special Forces have. They have teams of people, and I can prove it, like we have proven it over and over. They have teams of people, like organized scouting teams that come into the U.S., right? Then they have supply chains that bring batteries on their backs, car batteries to supply their antennas. And that's what how they communicate. So they can bring shipments into the country of narcotics, and we can't catch them because we can't catch the scouts. They're professionals. We can't catch the scouts. So in that area, there have been people sniped at, and there has been a lot of things that have gone wrong. But law enforcement in that area believes that most of the people who have been sniped at were people who were there for, like I'm there all the time, and I don't get sniped at, you know? I have a camera. I don't look like I'm there to interdict one of their drug loads. But if you go there and you look like you're out there to try to steal one of their drug loads, you'll get shot or you'll get hurt. There was a case I reported. I actually need to report the rest of the story now that I know it. There was a case I reported last week where I obtained an exclusive document. And this is a horrible thing to say from a pulpit, I know. But my headline was basically a male illegal immigrant got assaulted in the worst way possible, crossing the Arizona border into the U.S. And in the U.S., in Arizona, from Mexico, in Arizona, he was raped. You know, and does anyone not know what I'm talking about? Okay, I don't want to say the word from the pulpit. You know, I feel weird saying that word, but that's what happened to him. Well, it's like, well, who would do that to him? Armed men sexually assaulted this man. Turns out he was a drug mule, and he was trying to bring another group's drug shipment through another group's territory. So armed men, the scouts saw him, called in their teams on the U.S. soil. They got him, and then they taught him a lesson by sodomizing. You know what I mean? That's what they did. And that's the region you're talking about. So it's very sketchy. I try to be very visible with the camera, you know. I don't go in massively large groups because there's nothing. If you talk to Border Patrol agents from the region, if you call Border Patrol, they're not going to tell you that, but if you go there and talk to agents, they'll tell you all about it. Those scouts know what they're doing, and if you try to interfere with their business, you'll get messed up. So is it controlled by the cartel? You know, Brian Terry got killed because people overreacted who were interdicting a drug load. There were a bunch of rip crews, really, people there to steal drug loads. He got shot, and I'm sure if they were like, hey, that's a Border Patrol agent, BORTAC guy, they wouldn't have shot him, right? But it was like, you know, kind of thing, and they all went back and forth. Are they going to shoot at U.S. agents or federal agents out there knowingly? No. Are they going to shoot at you if you're out there with the camera? Probably not. If you're out there and they think you're trying to take their drug load or interfere with their drug load, they'll get you. So, yeah, truth to what you're saying. Yes, sir.
Sure.
Sure.
I want everybody to hear, so if you don't mind, because I've told this story in front of this group or in many groups many times, and I do a program called The Border Invasion. But right now, and I've talked to you about this briefly before, right now it's reported that there are somewhere between 6 and 10, maybe 12 buses of illegals coming through Rockwall, Texas, and they're stopping at the TA truck stop right over here in Rockwall at 205 and 30, okay? I've seen the buses. We have videos of the people getting off the buses. We had a guy interview the guys. They're all going to Chicago. Every one of them are going to Chicago. They're getting off of the buses, walking in, and 40 and 50 people getting off the buses, walking into the TA truck stop and paying for their free tows with American $100 bills. Now, this has been going on for a long time. Can you shed any light on anything like that? They're telling us that they're getting on the buses somewhere other on the other side of the border in Laredo, other side somewhere, and coming this way. They deadhead from Chicago. They unload in Chicago, and they deadhead all the way back to Mexico. Can you help me on that?
What I can tell you is most likely that's a situation where someone has workers coming in to work in yeah, well, then in that case, it would probably, and I don't know of the situation. I've heard you talk about it, and I've heard other people report similar things in other states, which we should talk about another time. But what I can tell you is that if you come into the United States from a third-tier nation, which means not Mexico and not Canada, right? So if you come from El Salvador, then it's very difficult for the U.S. under this president, this administration, to get you out of the country. Right? So probably what's occurring is you have a situation where some aid group, maybe possibly with governmental help, is trying to resettle the people who come across the border, just like they did in Marietta or like in California and like they did in other areas. That's probably what you're looking at. That's what I would think. We could talk more about it, but the resources involved, for instance, here's the math. The resources involved in following that and really digging into that are so great, and right now no one wants to read it. You know what I mean? It's hard for a company, because we're a for-profit business. Like, we can't stay in business. Like, if I want to write about the border all day long, and nobody wants to read it right now, and it doesn't get traffic, then I cannot afford to write about you see what I mean? I have no resources for it. So that's the tricky situation with that, is we have an administration where it's not shocking. Remember how shocking it was to see how many people came across the border? It's not shocking anymore, is it? When you hear about illegal aliens committing crimes and they were let go a week prior because they weren't deportable even though they were here illegally, it's not shocking anymore. Everyone it's just normal for us now, which is sad. Yes, sir. I don't want to talk about that yet, but shortly you will hear about that.
And we have a lot of tension on our southern border, right?
Yes, we do. Our northern border is wide open. There's a few differences between the southern border and the northern border. Here's the deal. North of our border, we really don't have the economic situation in Canada is comparable to the U.S. enough that there's really not a massive pull. The problem with Canada is that anyone from anywhere in the world can fly there and stay for a month, and then anyone who's there can actually just walk across our border, you know, because there's not a lot of security on the northern border. I think the southern border still is a greater threat, and I think the larger threats, like first off with terrorism, I think most terrorists are going to come here on a visa program legally. That's what they tend to do. And the tendency that we're seeing in terrorism right now, especially with ISIS or ISIL, whatever you call them, the Islamic State, is that their tendency, instead of trying to send people here, their tendency is to try to look cool and inspire people here. And it's working a lot. Which in turn means that, you know, like all of those busts you're seeing with people in ISIS and the FBI, I mean, that's some tricky, I can tell you, it's just from my experience, it's a tricky line to walk, trying to bust Americans before they commit a mass murder, an act of terrorism. It's really tricky because at any point, I mean, you can imagine how tricky that is with civil liberties, and which we need to respect, right? But it's a tricky line. But I think the greatest threat from terrorism right now is actually our visa programs. That's what would be suggested by all the acts of terrorism we've had in the country so far. 9/11, for instance. Yes, sir. Handsome man in the red shirt. You're talking about in 54? Eisenhower. And well, so during the years that we had worker programs and we're not allowing immigration, no, okay, so my knowledge, okay, in 1947 to 54, if you wanted to come into this country and work, you could. There were legal ways for you to. Right. But here's the deal. Even though anyone could come legally, when Eisenhower, it was actually called Operation Wetback, which is unfortunate because anybody who wants to do it again is going to be wanting to reignite Operation Wetback, and that's not going to work out for no politician's going to do that. It's just the truth. But they can't. You know, like that's a horrible name for something, you know, to reignite. But the problem is that between 47 and 54, even though everyone who wanted to come legally could come legally, we still ended up with over 1 million people here who came illegally during that time. Isn't that strange? That people still came illegally, that there were businesses who still wanted to make sure that they didn't have to do the minimal amount of protections for a legal worker program, and there were workers who, for criminal reasons and others, they just wanted to come and not go through the legal route. So even if we legally opened up the borders to anyone who wasn't a criminal, like they're all still, the criminals are still going to come, you know? Very well. But you hear what I'm telling you? So the immigration issue is tricky, though, because like I'm one, and this is something I went and spoke at this event for, I think it was like an event that Numbers USA did, and those guys were real nice to me because my reporting is beneficial to those guys. You know, like I dig really deep. I have a lot of sources. I publish a lot of leaked documents. I'm not WikiLeaks. I don't do that kind of stuff that hurts the U.S., but just experiences that agents have in police reports that are law enforcement sensitive, not classified. I publish all the time, and the way I do it is I have a number of prepaid cell phones that I distribute to federal agents on the border, and I then have a bunch of prepaid cell phones, and I'm able to get that information that way and through a couple of other ways. But here's the thing, though. As hard as I am on border security, I'm actually very gentle on immigration, not illegal immigration, but immigration. I'm not an anti-immigration person or a stop immigration. I'm a stop illegal immigration person, and there's half of our movement is like me, and the other half is like stop immigration. You know, and some things we can work together on. That's one of those things I told you I don't always agree with everyone in the Tea Party on. Is I don't want to stop immigration, but do I think that until we get some things sorted out, should be a hiatus on immigration? There might need to be. Our system is so messed up right now that the people who try to come legally are having a real hard time doing it because it's so insane. And then all you got to do is walk across the border and say, hey, I can't go home because it's violent there, and you get to stay. I mean, it's pretty bad. You know, we have a crazy system right now where most people get released. Yes, sir, in the purple shirt. Do I have plans to make myself available to Ted Cruz? I am available to anyone who wants to talk about issues that I care about or I think matters to this country. So, I got a lot of heat for Trump was invited to the border, and I got a lot of heat for being involved in that. And I was like, I don't know why. And they're like, because you, and I'm like, I would have invited everyone. I've invited crews to the border many times. I've invited most of them to the border many times, just not very many of them take me up on it. So when those who do take me up on it, I'm happy. I mean, if Rachel Maddow wanted to go to the border, I'd show her. If, no, but if Barack Obama said, hey, I want to see the border through your eyes, I'd be like, come on. I don't, to me, it's just, it's an issue. I have a responsibility. It's part of our nature, our DNA as an organization. People say, well, you're an advocacy journalist. And I'm like, and so are you. We are a response to the advocacy journalism of CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, PBS. I mean, I could go down the line, right? NYT. I mean, I could go down the line on organizations who promote a left-of-center agenda and attack Border Patrol agents. So we are a response to that, and that's why we also advocate for things, and we advocate for soldiers, and we advocate for cops, and we advocate for men and women who are doing a good job serving the country but are getting attacked for it. And that's what we do, just like they all attack those people. That's what we do. So I'd invite anybody down. I do love Ted Cruz. I'm friends with a number of his staff. I think very highly of he and his father. And in fact, I'm so favorable towards him, I generally don't cover that. I'm an editor, so I have staff who does. But I generally don't cover the issue because I make no bones about my feelings about Cruz, He's been a pretty consistent, good person. And everyone else talks about, they're like, well, I think so-and-so's reinvented him. I'm like, I don't want someone who reinvented himself. I'll just take this guy right here who's been that same guy all this time. And that's how I look at it. And so I really do like him. I wish he'd talk up a little more, But I do think highly of him as a person. There's a lot of noise in the room right now. You're right. But you know what? There might continue to be a lot of noise in the room. So we're going to have to figure that out. Yes, sir, in the patriotic shirt. Yes, sir. Oh. I talked to Joe Basil today, actually, this morning. I woke up and had my coffee on the phone with Joe Basil. And we talked about a little bit about theology, a little bit about prosperity gospel preachers who we thought were leading everyone astray. We talked about those videos. And we talked about Ashley Madison. The company I work for has a database with all that data. We can just search people's names, so we know a whole lot of information. And it's just really addicting because I can do it on my phone. So it's like if I'm at a store and I'm just sitting there and then there's this guy who walks up to the manager and goes, hi, how's it going today? I'm like, it's going great, thanks. And I look at his name and I'm like, It's horribly addicting. It's awful. The videos, it's tricky, So initially, I think what they were going to do was put out the videos in a way that more Breitbart style, like a video, kind of like the Planned Parenthood videos are coming out. Not to compare that with the murder of unborn babies, but then they decided to do it a little differently, and they're going to do longer pieces, longer video projects, and release it that way. So I do know a lot. I can't talk about. You know what? I'm used to saying this anyways. I cannot discuss that matter at this time. Ask me another question. Ask me something about it. Ask me just any question because I have another answer I want to give you. I cannot confirm or deny that. Sorry. The tunnels. Let's talk about tunnels. You asked about tunnels. Who asked about tunnels? Oh, you asked about tunnels. Okay, so the deal with the tunnels is if you talk to most experts, they're going to say that there are tunnels in California and Arizona. There doesn't need to be in New Mexico because it's just wide open. They're going to say that there are tunnels in in Arizona and California, and that there's never been tunnels in Texas. That is not true. There have been tunnels in Texas under the Rio Grande River. There was one that was found in El Paso, in the El Paso sector. discovered by agents. It was very clever how they did it, but they shut it down and closed it off. But most of the tunnels are done in California. They require a lot of concerted effort, most of them. The one that they found in Texas was one that literally some young guys spent years digging out under the Rio Grande River, just, not sophisticated at all. The ones in California and Arizona are very sophisticated. The tunnels usually get found out, at least we think they do, that's what we know about. An interesting thing to say about the tunnels is that none of the hundreds of millions of dollars that the U.S. government has spent to be able to find those tunnels with technology, none of those tunnels has ever been found by technology. Every one of those tunnels has been discovered through the use of human informants and human intelligence. Every one of those tunnels has been discovered by law enforcement of any sort, but particularly Border Patrol agents most of the time, and their intelligence agents who go in and interview the smugglers or the people who get caught, or illegal aliens, and illegal aliens tell them information. So where the Border Patrol could have an informant program like the FBI does, and they could run it like the FBI does, where it's not just criminals who are trying to get out of trouble, but there's also people like me who are just patriotic people who are trying to do the right thing, who just happen to feel like God wants them to do that, right? Run us like assets. The Border Patrol does not have that ability to run informants, and that's a real problem for any law enforcement. How many of you are former law enforcement, and any of you? Could you function without informants? Without people being able to share information with you? And you couldn't function. That's why the left attacks the use of informants so heavily, is because you couldn't possibly function without informants. And the FBI surely couldn't. They couldn't stop terrorist acts or whatever. But Border Patrol and CBP, they don't get to use informants, really, in the traditional sense of the word. But it's human intelligence that has discovered all those tunnels. So the tunnels, they get built. They usually have tracks in them. They usually have air conditioning in them, or ventilation of some sort, and electrical power. They usually go under the border, and they come up into industrial warehouses, sometimes houses, but usually into industrial commercial warehouses or what have you. And then eventually they get caught. They think that there's roughly 7 to 10 times they get used before somebody spills the beans somewhere, before the word gets out. And thankfully, U.S. law enforcement does take those tunnels pretty seriously. But the tunnels really aren't that big of a threat. And what I mean by that is they are a huge threat, but they're not as big of a threat as other ways. Because if you said to somebody like, hey, I'm going to pay you, if you told the Sinaloa, I'm going to give you $1 million to get Mohammed into the country, right? Not to be ugly and use that name, I'm just going to associate that name with a terrorist, okay, for some reason. If you said, I'm going to get Mohammed into the country, I'm going to give you $1 million, the Sinaloa cartel would be like, hey, dude, no, because we're going to make $4 billion next year off our cocaine going in the country, and you're not going to shut that down for us, because they're professional. But here's what you got to worry about. When it comes to terrorists, you got to worry about the Laredo sector. And I'll tell you why. There are sections of the Laredo sector and I've written about it, and unfortunately it hasn't changed. But people say, well, you're exposing our secrets. And it's like, yeah, I am. You're right. Now fix it. If somebody comes in that way from listening to me, it isn't my fault for exposing it. It's your fault as an agency for not doing something about it. What you should have done years ago, and I'm having to say something about. But the section outside of, just west of Laredo, northwest of Laredo as the river goes around, there's a section that's I want to say it's 70 to 80 miles, maybe 67 miles, and it's between Eagle Pass and Laredo. There's some oil fields out there, not much though. There's dirt roads that are really rough. You have to have a truck to be on most of the roads, especially the one that goes right along the border. And it's remote, very remote. And while I'm out there, I usually will see one agent cross every couple of hours, So what I know to be a fact is that, and this is something that Hector Garza, who's the National Border Patrol Council president for that local 2455 is what it is they see sign, right? They see footprints or what have you, that there's aliens in the country, people crossing. If two sets of footprints are going this way, and there's a group of 20 going this way, who is the agent going to go after? Not only is the agent naturally going to go after the group of 20, right? But that is actually the policy, that he has to go after the group of 20. So if I'm a terrorist, first off, I'm going to have to use the Gulf Cartel or the Zetas to get in the country, right? If I'm a known terrorist, like unknown terrorists can just get a visa. They can come here who want to do something bad, but a known terrorist, they're going to have to go through the Gulf Cartel or the Zetas, or else they're not going to get in because the Sinaloa ain't going to do it. So that means that that's going to have to be in Texas, right? The Gulf Cartel has the Rio Grande Valley, which is not locked down, but it's pretty dang close to locked down in relative terms to the Laredo sector. So that means it has to be the Laredo sector. If it has to be the Laredo sector, that means they're dealing with the Zetas, right? And if they're dealing with the Zetas, what the Zetas are going to do is they're going to go, okay, here's what we're going to do. You know those aliens we have in the stash house? Give me 20 of them. And give me that guide who we don't like, who's kind of a jerk. We're going to get him busted. We're going to sacrifice him. And now get me the real good guide, okay? He's going to be like, okay, Mohammed, you're going to go with this real good guide that way. And then, hey, Pedro, you're going to go, you know, the guy I don't like. You're going to go that way with these 20 aliens, you know? And make sure to go through this field here where there's mud, you know, where you're going to leave footprints and stuff. And then Border Patrol, the limited resources they have there, are going to go after the group of 20, and Mohammed got in the country successfully. That's what they're going to do. So when we talk about tunnels are the buzz term right now, but it's really not, the tunnels really aren't the sexy thing. The thing that really is a danger is just that in itself, and the areas where that exists, you know. That's the danger that we have. A couple more, and then I'm going to roll out of here, not keep you guys too long. Yes, ma'am. Oh. Okay, I feel so bad doing this. How many of you are like, I gotta get out of here, I wish this guy would shut up? Come on, be honest, a couple of you. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a real quick story, and I promise you I will, okay, here's what I'm gonna tell you. Before I tell that story, okay? Remember red, yellow, green, trust me, that's the story. It's about working undercover. I'll explain something to you. How many of you have pens and paper real quick? Okay, get that out. Okay, write this down. My phone number is 202-779-2750. That's my cell phone, so don't go publish my phone number. 202-779-2750. If you're in a pickle, in a spot, if you're having problems in the Tea Party and you can't get people to get along, and you need somebody to come help out and chill everybody out, or if you want to get involved in helping other people to show that conservatives actually do care, or if you know people who need help, you can contact me. I'm not, you know, the last year of school that I finished was 8th grade. I have no formal education, but I'm actually not stupid. And so I'm a little bit tricky and clever sometimes. So if you're in a bind about our movement, you can call me, and I will do my best to help you. It might take me a few days to get back to you, but I will help you. Now, that said, I have to be in Austin tomorrow morning. So when I leave here, I'm going to drive to Austin, right? And so when I'm done talking, I'm going to boogie for that door, and I'm going to ask that y'all understand I'm going to boogie for that door and get in my truck and leave. Part of that is because I really want a cigarette right now. But the other part is because I really do need to be in Austin. So now that I've gotten that clear, I'm going to tell this one last little bit of a lengthy story, right? I'm going to go as quickly as I can. When you say what motivates the left, let me explain how this works. The average person on the left, they care about other people. They really do. The people in leadership on the left know they're full of it, and they want power. And they manipulate those people who care. I can tell you that because I was there, and that's what I experienced. But that's not only experiential knowledge like that, but I can tell you some hardcore data, like what I know to be the case, right? What I factually observed, not just my feelings about what happened in my life as a youth and how I was exploited or taken in by these people. But let me tell you something. When I worked undercover, it was really interesting. I was working undercover at the RNC, the 2008 Republican National Convention. And this woman who used to be a mentor of mine named Lisa Fithian, right? She she was called in to organize the Black Bloc anarchists, you know, the several thousand people wearing black masks who later started calling themselves Occupy, right? She was called in to organize that crowd. And then the average 10,000 protesters who came, the liberals who were just Democrats who didn't like Bush, right? And who were anti-war, you know, the Quakers and whatever. And the hairy-legged women from Austin. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about, the crowd, you get it. I'm sorry, that's so rude. See, I'm sitting here trying to walk with God, but my tongue gets me in so much trouble. Sometimes I think like that about them. And I should love them. And not say anything about their hairy legs and armpits. And, you know. But y'all know, y'all been to Austin, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, the Adam's apple, right. Well, okay, so here's the deal. United for Peace and Justice organized the protest, right, of 10,000 liberals who would never disobey the law. They just wanted to go there and protest legally, and that's their right, you know. Disagree with them, yeah, but that's their right. That's American, okay, cool. Now, the problem is several thousand people were there to shut it down by any means necessary, right? Okay. So here you have the city of St. Paul, and in the center, just imagine, I know it's not geographically correct, but in the center you have the Excel Center where the Republican National Convention was. And you have several main arteries that go into that Excel Center, right? Then you have, naturally, all the delegates have to stay at hotels and they have to rent buses to bus the people into the Excel Center. So if the delegates can't get into the Excel Center, then the Republican National Convention gets effectively shut down, right? Okay. I don't know about you, but that's some un-American stuff right there. It's like, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to prevent you from assembling. Very un-American, man. That's real bad, right? Like real anti-American, in my opinion, that concept. So here's what they did. United for Peace and Justice organized the massive demonstration that was legal. One of the steering committee members, one of the 3 or 4 leaders from the group is Lisa Fithian. She then organizes the anarchists, okay? The Occupy crowd with the black masks who throw bricks and firebombs. All the while, United for Peace and Justice say they have nothing to do with these radicals, and these radicals say that they're separate from the average protester in the media, but they're led by the same people. Okay. So they decide in the training sessions, they said, we're going to take each artery, we're going to divide the city into sectors. We're going to take each artery, and we're going to have 3 groups of people, the red, yellow, and the green, okay? The red team are people who are going to fight cops and get arrested, or not get arrested, they're going to fight cops and flee. I'll get into that in a minute. The yellow team is the civil disobedience people who are going to commit nonviolent civil disobedience, and they're going to go to jail just like Martin Luther King did, you know, like that kind of people. And they talk like that, too. They do up twinkles, you know about that? Remember up twinkles? But that's not the point about up twinkles and hairy legs. That's not the point. And dreadlocks. They have dreadlocks, like white people with dreadlocks. And they probably smoke stuff every day. That's not the point either. The point is they have the arrestables, the yellow team. And then they have the green team, right? Now, so Lisa says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take each artery in, and we're going to get the yellow team who's going to get arrested, but we'll have lawyers set up from them with the ACLU and the Lawyers Guild, no problem. And they're going to chain themselves across the roadways. They're going to put their arms in PVC pipes and handcuff themselves so cops can't cut them out easily without possibly hurting them, which means they won't cut them out right away. And that's going to stop the buses from coming in. You know, we're going to block this whole city down. And then someone said, well, Lisa, how are we going to do that? The cops they're not going to let those people chain themselves up. She said, well, that's where the green team comes in. All the protesters who are here, the ones who would never break the law. So we're going to get the green team. We're going to have people in the crowd who are kind of their leaders, and they're going to encourage the green team to go in the road and have chaos. And then the police are going to tell the green team to get out of the road. Like, yeah, I'll get out of the road. And those people, because they're average, decent liberals who aren't, you know, they're just Democrats, right? They're not out to break the law or overthrow America, they're going to get out of the road when the cops tell them to because they're law-abiding. And then the group, the protest organizers, the leaders are supposed to slow them down and make them not get out of the street quickly, but eventually they're going to get out of the street. Hopefully that gave the yellow group enough time to lock down. So here you have the green group being manipulated to provide cover for the illegal behavior of the yellow group, but the green group doesn't know it. You get it? The green group doesn't know it. They're not aware that they're being used that way by the leaders. And then, once the green group's out of the road, if the yellow group still hasn't had time to lock down, then comes the red group with the black masks on. And they attack law enforcement with weapons. They attack law enforcement with batons. They had signs, protest signs, that were, the sticks were not just normal sticks. They were made out of big bats, you know? But if you take them away, you're taking away signs, which you can't do, right? You know? And so they would attack law enforcement. And then the red group, remember, they're not supposed to get arrested. So then the red group would go into the crowd, a peaceful green group, remove their masks and their stuff, drop it, and then be part of the green group. So then when the cops went after the red group, all those people in the green group really think the cops are coming after peaceful demonstrators because they don't know how they're being manipulated. So when you ask me about the left, could you think of a better explanation than that? It's good, right? And that is so just exactly what it is. So guys, listen, it's getting late. You guys get home to your families. Thank you for coming to see me. I appreciate it. Thank you. That's so sweet.